There are certain narrative milestones we've all come to rely on in our entertainment. The shocking death, the flashback that reveals all, the long awaited first kiss. And then, of course, there's the wedding. Whether it serves as the end point to a narrative or, in the case of Ang Lee's 1993 film, The Wedding Banquet, is the pièce de résistance, weddings are one of the most reliable plot devices out there. And it's easy to see why. On a superficial level, there's the pomp and circumstance attached to the event. What will the bride's gown look like? Where will it take place? Who's going to be there? That last question speaks to the inherent dramatic core of a wedding, both on screen and in real life. Weddings are, after all, a community event, a chance to get family, friends, rivals, old flames, and whoever else together for a pressure cooker of a day and see what boils over. So, yeah, the so-called marriage plot is a fun one to observe and or pursue. It's a beautiful thing to see two people join together in such a moving way in real life. And as a narrative tool, I personally enjoy the ways in which creators take a universal ritual like a wedding and mold it to fit the world of their work. However, it wasn't really until I discovered and then watched Lee's film that, apart from the surface level ways in which weddings are appealing, I began to think about what other purposes do they serve. What can an underappreciated queer romantic comedy from 1993 reveal about the place that traditional marriage has in 2023? Hi, everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I am Dustin, aka the Film Fanatic, and this is another installment of my series 1993 to present. In these videos, I take a movie from the year of 1993 and explore it through today's cultural lens, see what it has to offer us as film goers 30 years later. So I don't know if it's like totally in frame, but I am wearing my Bi Pride tank top for a couple of reasons. First, because the film that I am going to be looking at today is a gay romantic comedy. Yay, love that for us. And also, I happen to be filming this during Pride Month here in America. And before we get into dissecting the wedding banquet, I really wanted to take a second, um, especially to my fellow members of the LGBTQ plus community that might be happening to watch this. We're at a really unsettling time for LGBTQ rights, particularly here in America, and particularly in regards to legislation aimed at transgender and non binary folks. It is personally for me been very troubling and devastating to see just across the board how horrific some of these laws that are being passed are. Um, I know in the state that I'm currently living in, Kansas, on July 1st, there's supposed to be a law going into effect that bans transgender, gender nonconforming folks from using the bathroom of their choice in public facilities. It's known as SB 180. And the city that I'm currently living in right now is working to get the city to recognize Lawrence, Kansas, which is where I'm at right now, as a sanctuary city for transgender, gender nonconforming, non binary folks when that law sadly goes into effect on July 1st. So I really just wanted to take a second to let everybody know this Pride Month, if you haven't done so already, show up for the LGBTQ plus community. There are way more things, big and small, that we all, myself included, could be doing. If there's a drag queen story hour in your community, go take your kids, support support them. Even if you don't have kids, go and support those drag queens, drag queen brunches, drag queen shows at your local bars. Support them, show up for them in positive ways, and show up particularly for transgender, non binary folks that you may hold near and dear in your life. It's not enough just to kind of passively stand by at this point. We have to make clear declarative statements that we're standing by this community and supporting them, because if they don't have basic human rights, none of us do. What's the point of us having those rights if they're not shared by with everybody? So with that, let's turn the corner and get into the wedding banquets. The wedding banquet centers on Wai Tung, a gay Taiwanese realtor who lives in New York City with his longtime boyfriend, Simon. Facing pressure from his parents, who don't know he's gay, to marry, Simon proposes that Wai Tung marry one of his tenants, Wei Wei, an immigrant from mainland China who needs a green card to remain in America. Wai Tung and Wei Wei go through with the marriage, which prompts Wai Tung's parents to make a surprise trip to America in order to throw the supposedly happy couple a lavish wedding banquet. Now Wei Wei and Wai Tung must pretend to be a happy couple lest his parents discover Wai Tung's sexuality, while Simon masquerades as Wai Tung's ever-present roommate. The wedding banquet of the title occurs the night of which Wai Tung and Wei Wei consummate their marriage. Wei Wei ends up pregnant as a result. Wai Tung's parents eventually learn and, in their own ways, come to accept their son's sexuality, and in the end, Wai Tung, Wei Wei, and Simon resolve to remain as one family unit. Wei Wei will have the baby, which Wai Tung and Simon will help raise. The movie was a critical and commercial success. Made on a $1 million budget, it ultimately grossed a little over $23 million worldwide, and was nominated for the Best Foreign Language Film Oscar. It even won the Silver Bear at the Berlin International Film Festival. Despite this, it's not a movie that seems widely remembered today, nor is it one that's often mentioned when discussing Ang Lee's filmography. Though, upon seeing it, The Wedding Banquet may be one of Lee's most important films. Of course, it's easy to compare it to Lee's other queer love story, Brokeback Mountain, but there's more to that comparison than the obvious. Like Brokeback, The Wedding Banquet doesn't really engage with the queer life and culture of its time. Early in the film, we get a glimpse of Simon wearing a shirt emblazoned with the art of Keith Haring, as well as a shot of him volunteering with ACT UP, the silence equals death logo clearly visible in one shot. And sure, the movie may be slim on specific representations of queerness, perhaps partially due to its main conceit of concealing a gay relationship. But to Lee's credit, just as he would later do with Brokeback Mountain, he excels at providing stirring, intimate moments between his two male leads. These softer, intimate moments shared between Wai Tung and Simon echo those shared by Jack and Ennis 12 years later. And obviously in a different way than he does in Brokeback, Lee leaves you waiting for these moments, making them all the more impactful and earned when they finally arrive. Then there are the romantic comedy elements and funny, heartfelt family dynamics that call to mind his adaptation of Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility, which he would make 2 years later. In comparison to that film, which is obviously concerned with the very white world of 18th century British society, The Wedding Banquet allows Lee to explore similar themes of family, love, and, yes, marriage through his own perspective as a Taiwanese man. In these ways, The Wedding Banquet could be seen as the blueprint for what future Ang Lee films would explore, and the directorial choices Lee would use to explore those ideas. Not only that, though, but I would go so far as to say that The Wedding Banquet is far more subversive a film than any of the other mainstream films in his catalog. Not only do you have, at the height of the AIDS epidemic, a gay romantic comedy, But this particular gay romantic comedy literally and figuratively decenters whiteness to make room for a story that spotlights the very specific experience of a Taiwanese gay protagonist. While stories, regardless of genre, that make strides to shift away from the white gaze are more common today and have rightfully been met with critical acclaim, they've also seen unfair, frankly racist backlash. There's a discomfort to seeing your experience undercut or pushed aside in favor of another, and Lee plays on this exact idea in the wedding banquet sequence itself. In an interview with the Los Angeles Times around the film's release, Lee notes that he aimed to satirize the tradition of the wedding banquet, wishing to, quote, stir things up rather than sticking to the Chinese ideal, which is to appeal for calm, end quote. And there's no question that Lee achieves this absence of calm during this scene. The banquet is relentlessly high energy, a nonstop party that at times feels so immersive it's like you've been invited to the party yourself. And while Lee's desire to illustrate his perceived absurdity of the wedding banquet tradition is apparent, there's more going on in this sequence than just satirizing a ceremony. I personally found myself tracking the white guests of the wedding. Obviously, there's Simon, who mostly stays within the orbit of Weiwei and Waitung. But then there are the other white guests, presumably friends of Waitung's and Simon's, all collected at one table. The camera pans to them throughout the banquet, and as you might guess, their experience of what they're witnessing is markedly different than those of the Asian guests. They look on at the spectacle with barely suppressed, condescending smirks that really say it all. We'd rather not be here, but what the hell? At least this will make a good story we can tell later that'll make us feel better about ourselves. Watching the wedding banquet and researching for this video, I kept coming across this phrase, marriage of convenience. Now, it's not a new concept to me, and it's probably not to you, but within the context of this film, I found myself really rolling it around in my head for maybe the first time ever. Because aren't all weddings by design convenient? To whom is a particular wedding convenient for? Let's look at our three leads. Waitung, as the first and only child, has impossibly high expectations to please his traditionalist parents, even at the expense of his own happiness with Simon. Simon, of course, hatches the marriage of convenience plan in the first place, and in theory, his logic is sound and also kind of subversive. The union between Waitung and Weiwei allows them to fulfill the traditional values of marriage while queering the institution so that it fits their personal needs. Of course, this backfires when Waitung's parents make their surprise visit. Simon is made an outsider in the home he shares with Waitung, living in the margins of the domestic heteronormative lie he's helped to create. Then there's Weiwei, who begins the film as Waitung's tenant, a free-spirited, independent artist whose most feasible option for remaining in America is to enter into a sham marriage. With the arrival of Waitung's parents, Weiwei gets more entangled in this marriage of convenience than she bargained for, becoming, as scholar Jiefei writes in their article, Seeking Identities Across the World, a critical analysis of the wedding banquet, quote, domesticated and living as a traditional Chinese woman, married with a child, wearing long conservative dresses rather than the bizarre ones she wore before. This is what a marriage of convenience gets Weiwei. The signing of one paper in exchange for another paper promising her a life in America, both in exchange for who she was before. The ways this convenient marriage inconveniences each character individually really brought home to me the idea of marriage's intrinsic ties to legal and financial systems. Sure, the ceremony is fun, if a stressful bonus, but at the end of the day, when you take away all the pomp and circumstance, marriage is simply a piece of paper that saves you money in the long run. This may seem like a cynical take. Full disclosure, I am not married, never have been. Do with that what you will. But for me personally, as a queer man in America, the concept of marriage is a complicated one. After all, it was not until the 2015 Obergefell ruling by the Supreme Court that same sex marriage was even a legal right for citizens across all 50 states. And as we saw last year with the overturning of Roe v. Wade by the Supreme Court, combined with the increase in anti LGBTQ and particularly anti transgender legislation that we've seen only escalate as the years have gone on, it's hard for me personally to take solace in a ruling that can seemingly be overturned by the whim of just a few people. Chase Strangio, a transgender rights lawyer for the ACLU, gave an interview with The Advocate in 2022 where he talks about why he practices law despite not having full faith in the American legal system's ability to protect the rights of its most vulnerable citizens. Strangio states that he sees the practice of law as, quote, a form of harm reduction, a delaying tool that gives people more time to mobilize, to build more resources, and transform our living conditions in more meaningful ways than the law will ever allow. The last part of Strangio's response was heavily on my mind when watching the end of the wedding banquet. The decision of Weiwei to keep her baby, for Simon to become the baby's quote-unquote second father while remaining Weitung's partner, may come off as a quaint attempt to satisfy the romantic comedy's need for a happy ending. But I see this ending as Weitung, Simon, and Weiwei making their own version of a convenient life. Maybe Weiwei and Weitung will end up getting divorced, but they'll still live together for the sake of their child. Perhaps Simon will remain faithfully at Weitung's side for a few years before deciding he wants something beyond this version of a domestic life. Regardless of where these characters may be 30 years later, the point is that, together, they made the decision to make a life that suited their needs. A few pieces of paper may have gotten them there, but they won't let them define how they choose to live their lives. They will thrive and exist on their own terms and conditions. Speak now if you want. They've already claimed their peace. Thank you so much for tuning in for this video. I hope this got you inspired to want to check out The Wedding Banquet. Like I said earlier, this wasn't a movie that I was super familiar with until a couple of months ago. And I was able to get it from my local library, and it's also streaming on Tubi currently. Um, but if you can get your hands on it, I totally recommend you watching it. There's so much more I could have gotten into, particularly the bi-ness, potential bi-ness that is in the movie. Um, but when you watch it, come back and let me know what you think. And if you're not subscribed, please do so. I've really appreciated all of those who have subscribed. You can follow me on Instagram at dvan93, and also on Twitter at DustinVan. Until next time, thank you so much.